I came home nearly 2 months earlier than anyone expected. The elevator doors slid open, and before I could take 2 steps, Harold Benson grabbed my wrist so hard I almost dropped my suitcase. His hand was trembling. "Daniel," he whispered, his eyes darting down the hallway. "Whoever's been staying in your apartment, please make them stop screaming every night." For a moment, I thought he was kidding. Then I looked at his face. Harold had lived across the hall from me for almost 12 years. At 74, the retired mailman was the kind of man who watered the flowers outside the building before sunrise and laughed over burnt burgers at every 4th of July cookout. I'd also seen him bury his wife with tears in his eyes. I knew what grief looked like on him. This wasn't grief. It was fear. "Harold," I said slowly, "I think you've got the wrong apartment." He blinked. "I'm talking about 10B. That's my apartment." "I know." I held his gaze. "I haven't been home in over 2 months." The color drained from his face. His fingers slipped off my wrist, and neither of us spoke. The hallway fell into an eerie silence. Franklin Towers was always quiet. Most of the residents were retired, and once evening came, the only sounds were distant TVs, humming ice makers, and the old elevator groaning between floors. Harold swallowed hard. "But someone's been living there." Before I could respond, Mrs. Lopez cracked open her door across the hall. She looked at Harold, then at me, and froze. "Oh my God," she whispered, covering her mouth. "I thought." "You thought what?" I asked. "I thought you'd rented the place out." Harold nodded. "That's what we all believed." I stared at them. "What are you talking about?" Mrs. Lopez stepped into the hallway. "The lights come on every evening. Someone leaves around 8 every morning, comes back around 6, sometimes carrying groceries." Harold's voice broke. "And every night, around midnight, someone starts screaming." The words lingered in the silence. I let out a short laugh, not because it was funny, but because none of it made any sense. "There has to be some mistake." Harold slowly shook his head. "There isn't." My mind immediately went to the spare keys. Emily had returned hers years ago after moving to Chicago. Karen, my ex-wife, handed hers back the day our divorce was finalized. That left only one person with legal access to my apartment, Rick Wallace, the building manager. He kept the master key for emergencies, nothing else. I turned toward apartment 10B. Everything looked exactly as I had left it. The welcome mat sat perfectly straight. The brass numbers gleamed under the hallway lights. No scratches on the lock. No sign of forced entry. I walked to the door. Harold caught my sleeve. "You shouldn't go in there alone." I gave him a small smile, reached into my pocket, and slid my key into the lock. It turned effortlessly. The deadbolt clicked with the same familiar sound I'd heard hundreds of times before. I eased the door open, and something felt off before I even looked around. Not because of what I saw, but because of what I smelled. A place left empty for over 2 months should have stale air, dust, and silence. Mine smelled lived in. Fresh hazelnut coffee, clean laundry, bacon cooked not long ago. I froze. At first glance, the living room looked exactly the way I'd left it. My leather recliner sat in its usual spot. My bookshelves hadn't moved. The Cleveland Guardians calendar still hung beside the kitchen. But the details told a different story. The throw blanket had been folded differently. A pair of reading glasses I'd never seen rested on the side table. Beside the couch sat a ceramic coffee mug with coffee still inside, fresh enough that it hadn't even formed a film. I quietly shut the door behind me. "Hello?" Silence. Then came the faint drip of running water somewhere in the kitchen. I walked farther inside and pressed my hand against the dishwasher. It was still warm. Someone had used it recently. The TV was off, but the blue standby light glowed in the darkness. Whoever lived here had left only minutes before, or so I thought. I stepped into the hallway leading toward the bedrooms and stopped cold. Every family photo was gone. Emily's graduation picture, the fishing trip with my father, the framed photo from Yellowstone. All of them had vanished. Only pale rectangles remained where years of sunlight hadn't reached the paint. It looked as if someone had carefully erased every trace that I had ever lived there. Then the guest bedroom door opened. A man in his mid-40s walked into the hallway wearing my bathrobe and holding one of my coffee mugs. He stared at me with confusion for only a second before his expression hardened. "What the hell?" he demanded. "Who are you?" Neither of us moved. I expected him to bolt. Instead, he stepped toward me, as if I were the one who didn't belong. "I asked you a question. How did you get into my apartment?" My mind went blank. After 35 years investigating insurance fraud, I'd learned to recognize a lie almost instantly. This man wasn't pretending. He genuinely believed every word he was saying. Then my eyes landed on the hallway table behind him. Where my family photos used to be sat a framed picture of people I'd never seen before. This wasn't someone breaking into my condo. Someone had replaced my entire life with another man's. For the first time in decades, I had no idea what was happening. He never looked away. "Who are you?" he asked again, slower this time. I raised the key that was still hanging from my fingers. "My name is Daniel Mercer, and this is my condo." Uncertainty flashed across his face for the briefest moment before he shook his head. "No," he said. "I rented this place legally 6 weeks ago." I let out a dry laugh. My brain refused to accept what I was hearing. "I bought this condo in 2008. Neither of us shouted. We simply stood there, two strangers, each convinced the other had walked into the wrong home. Finally, he pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police." I was about to suggest the same thing. Less than 15 minutes later, 2 Columbus police officers arrived. Officer Grant looked barely 30, and Officer Lewis wasn't much older. They listened without interrupting as we each told our side of the story. When we finished, Officer Grant looked at me and asked, "Do you have identification showing this address?" I handed him my Ohio driver's license. He studied it for a moment before turning to the other man. Officer Grant turned to the stranger. "What about you?" Without hesitation, the man pulled out his driver's license. "Same address. Apartment 10B, Franklin Towers." Grant stared at both licenses, then rubbed his forehead. "All right, let's start from the beginning." The man introduced himself. "Michael Rhodes, 47, software engineer. I transferred from Cincinnati after taking a management job with Nationwide." He spoke calmly, like a man caught in someone else's nightmare, not someone trying to hide a crime. Officer Lewis asked, "Do you have a lease?" Michael walked to the dining table, his dining table, as far as he believed, and picked up a neatly organized folder. Inside was everything. A signed lease, move-in checklist, security deposit receipt, utility confirmations, parking permit, HOA welcome packet, even proof that he'd paid a total of $5,600 for his first month's rent and security deposit. Every document listed me, Daniel Mercer, as the landlord. Every signature looked disturbingly close to my own. Officer Grant looked at me. "Mr. Mercer?" I shook my head. "I never signed any of those." Michael frowned. "What are you talking about? We met twice. I've never seen you before today." The room fell silent. Officer Lewis broke it. "Mr. Rhodes, did you meet him in person?" "Twice," Michael answered without hesitation. "When?" "The first week of May." I slowly shook my head. "I spent the entire month in Phoenix." Michael looked from me to the paperwork, his confidence slipping for the first time. "No, that's impossible." Grant turned back to me. "Can you prove you were in Arizona?" "Easily." Within minutes, I pulled up airline boarding passes, hotel reservations, consulting contracts, expense reports, restaurant receipts, and photos from job sites. Every record placed me nearly 2,000 miles away. Officer Grant reviewed them one by one before exchanging a long look with Officer Lewis. When both officers turned toward Michael again, the color had drained from his face. Then Officer Lewis asked another question. "When were the utilities transferred?" "About 5 weeks ago." Michael opened another folder. Electric, gas, water, internet. Every account had already been switched into his name, and every date matched the paperwork perfectly. Grant looked at me. "When was the last time you checked those accounts?" I hesitated. "Everything was on automatic payment." He nodded. "Did you receive any notices?" "No." The answer hit me harder than I expected. It should have bothered me long before now. Then I realized something else. I hadn't even checked my mailbox since getting home. About 10 minutes later, Rick Wallace, the Franklin Towers building manager, walked in wearing his usual polo shirt. He looked surprised to see me. Or at least he made it look that way. Daniel, when did you get back? About 40 minutes ago. His eyes swept across the apartment, then landed on Michael and the two officers. What's going on? After Officer Grant summarized everything, Rick scratched his chin. Well, I thought Daniel had moved. I stared at him. What? You told me you were relocating. I absolutely did not. Rick shrugged awkwardly. Someone came into the office with paperwork. They said you'd accepted a permanent consulting job in Arizona and wanted to rent the condo instead of selling it. My stomach tightened. That conversation never happened. Rick frowned, searching his memory. I could have sworn. Officer Lewis cut him off. Did you verify his identity? Rick looked down. I recognized the name. I didn't think I had a reason to question it. It sounded like a weak excuse, but not an impossible one. People make mistakes. Then a soft knock came from the open doorway. Harold had returned. Officer Grant invited Harold inside. The old man looked at me with guilt written all over his face. I'm sorry, Daniel. For what? I truly believed you'd rented the place out. Mrs. Lopez stepped in behind him, then another neighbor, and another. Within 15 minutes, 4 different residents had told nearly the exact same story. The man living in my condo waved good morning, accepted packages for neighbors, held doors open, complained about the Browns, chatted about the weather. He acted like he'd lived there for years. No one questioned him, because nothing about him seemed out of place. Officer Grant finally closed his notebook. I don't think either of you is lying. Neither Michael nor I spoke. I think you're both victims of fraud. The word hit me harder than I expected. Fraud. I'd spent 35 years exposing it. Now I was standing in the middle of it. Officer Lewis let out a quiet sigh. The problem is, Mr. Rhodes appears to be a victim too. Michael slowly sank onto my couch, looking completely drained. I emptied my savings to get this place, he said, his voice breaking. I thought this was my chance to start over. For the first time that day, I stopped seeing him as the man wearing my bathrobe. I saw someone whose life had just fallen apart alongside mine. Then Officer Grant said something I never imagined hearing. Until ownership and occupancy are sorted out, neither of you should stay here tonight. I stared at him in disbelief. You're asking me to leave my own home? He paused before answering. I know how unfair that sounds, but this is now both a criminal fraud investigation and a civil dispute. We can't risk either of you accusing the other of stealing or damaging property. I looked around my own living room, my own kitchen, the empty spaces where my family photos had once been. Then, without another word, I packed a small overnight bag. As I reached the front door, Michael spoke quietly. I'm sorry. I honestly believe this was my home. I looked at him and nodded once. I know. Walking out of my own condo felt even stranger than finding someone else living inside it. Harold was waiting in the hallway. You all right? He asked softly. I forced a smile. I spent 35 years proving when people were lying. I looked back at apartment 10B. Today, for the first time in my life, I honestly don't know who's telling the truth. As the elevator doors closed, one thought refused to leave my mind. Someone hadn't just stolen my condo. They had stolen my identity and somehow convinced an entire building that I no longer belonged there. I barely slept that night. The hotel was only 10 minutes from Franklin Towers, but it felt like another world. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the air conditioner click on and off, and every sound pulled my mind back to my apartment, my recliner, my kitchen, my coffee maker, my home. Then, sometime in the middle of the night, a dangerous thought crept in. What if they're right? Not about the condo, about me. I was 62. In Phoenix, I'd misplaced my reading glasses twice before realizing they were sitting on top of my head. One afternoon, I'd walked into the garage and completely forgotten why. Small things, normal things. But what if my memory wasn't as reliable as I believed? The doubt lasted only a few seconds before anger pushed it aside. No. I hadn't imagined 62 days in Arizona. I hadn't imagined airline tickets, consulting reports, hotel receipts, or my Sunday night video calls with Emily. Those were facts, and facts don't disappear. Someone wanted me to question my own sanity. I wasn't about to make their job easier. Emily called a little after 7 that morning. Dad, You sound terrible. I've had better days. I told her everything from the moment I stepped off the elevator to the moment I walked out of my own condo with an overnight bag. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked only one question. What does your gut tell you? I didn't hesitate. Someone spent weeks planning this, and they knew exactly when I'd be gone. She was quiet for a moment. It wasn't Mom. I couldn't help smiling. I know. She still can't remember the password to her iPad. Emily laughed softly. That's probably true. Then her voice turned serious. Dad, you spent 35 years catching professional liars. Don't let one of them convince you you're losing your mind. Those words stayed with me all morning. By 9 o'clock, I was back at the Franklin Towers management office. Rick Wallace looked surprised to see me. Morning, Daniel. I need to see the security footage. He hesitated. From when? The last 2 months. His expression changed instantly. I'm afraid that's not possible. Why? Our cameras only keep recordings for 14 days. I folded my arms. Rick, I investigated insurance fraud for 35 years. He blinked. So I know buildings like this usually hire outside security companies. He forced a smile. We're pretty old school here. Then give me the company's name. For the first time since I'd known him, Rick looked uneasy. I'd have to look it up. I'll wait. No need. I'll email it later. I smiled back. No, you won't. An hour later, I was sitting inside the office of Franklin Towers' security contractor on the north side of Columbus. The operations manager, Linda Harris, listened carefully as I explained everything. Our local system overwrites footage after 2 weeks, she said. I nodded. That's what I was told. She turned back to her computer. But we archive motion-triggered clips to cloud storage for liability reasons. I stared at her. You do? Most residents don't know that. She searched for several minutes before stopping. Here it is. Friday, May 9. The hallway outside my apartment appeared on the screen. The image wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough. A man wearing a baseball cap stepped off the elevator. Another camera caught him collecting a stack of mail from my mailbox before returning upstairs. He reached apartment 10B, pulled out a master key, and unlocked my door. My stomach tightened. Linda enlarged the footage. Just before the elevator doors opened, the man looked up. I stopped breathing. Steve Collins. I'd met Steve back in 1993. He was the first investigator assigned to train me. For years, we drove across Ohio together, chasing insurance fraud. Our families spent holidays together. Our daughters went trick-or-treating side by side. When his marriage fell apart, I'd loaned him $40,000 without charging a dime of interest. He promised to pay me back when life got better. It never did, and I never asked. That's what friends do, or at least, that's what I believed. Linda glanced at me. You know him? Unfortunately. I drove straight to Miller's Family Diner in Dublin. Steve was there almost every Thursday. Same booth, same black coffee, same slice of blueberry pie. Some habits never change. Sure enough, he was exactly where I expected. He looked up, smiled, and waved me over. Well, look who's back from Arizona. I slid into the booth across from him. Finished earlier than expected. How was Phoenix? Hot. He chuckled. I don't miss that heat. The waitress filled our coffee cups without asking. She knew us both. Steve picked up his mug and smiled. So, when did you get back? Yesterday. Everything all right? Steve asked. So far. He studied my face. You look exhausted. Didn't sleep much. I know the feeling. For the next minute we talked about baseball, the Guardians, the Reds, nothing that mattered. Then I casually changed the subject. I've been reorganizing the condo. Can't remember where I left my cordless drill. Steve answered without even looking up. Check the guest bedroom closet. The words hit the table like a gunshot. Neither of us moved. I had never mentioned the guest bedroom. I hadn't even said I'd been inside the condo. Steve realized his mistake a split second later. It was barely visible, but I caught it. I slowly stirred my coffee. You sound awfully sure. He cleared his throat. I just remembered helping you organize a while back. Really? Yeah. I nodded. That's strange. I don't remember ever putting it there. Silence settled over the booth. The waitress arrived with his blueberry pie, but neither of us touched it. Finally, Steve forced a smile. You always were suspicious, Daniel. Occupational hazard. He gave a short laugh. Fair enough. I looked him straight in the eye. Did you know someone's been living in my condo? His fork froze halfway to the pie. No. You sure? Of course. They're using documents with my signature. He shrugged. Sounds like identity theft. It is. Then let the police deal with it. I probably will. His shoulders relaxed. I stood up and slipped $20 beneath my coffee mug. Thanks for the coffee. He looked surprised. Leaving already? Yeah. As I reached the door, he called after me. Hope everything works out. I looked back. So do I. Outside, I sat in my truck for nearly 10 minutes without starting the engine. Steve had lied. I was certain of it. But one question kept bothering me. If he'd been inside my condo, where did he get a master key? Franklin Towers kept those locked inside the management office, unless someone on the inside had handed him one. My phone buzzed. It was Linda Harris. Mr. Mercer? I'm here. I kept reviewing the archived footage. My grip tightened on the phone. And? Your friend wasn't acting alone. What do you mean? I found 6 different Fridays where he shows up. She paused. Every single time. He arrives about 5 minutes after Rick Wallace unlocks the mailbox room. I closed my eyes. The entire case shifted in an instant. Steve wasn't the one running the operation. He was following someone else's plan. I drove away with the radio off. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was building a case. 35 years investigating staged fires, fake injuries, identity theft, and paper companies had taught me one lesson. Every fraud falls apart the moment the people behind it get comfortable. Comfortable people always make mistakes. I intended to let Rick Wallace make one. The next morning, Detective Sarah Mitchell called. She'd been assigned to the criminal investigation after Officer Grant filed his report. I watched the security footage, she said. Your friend Steve definitely entered your apartment. And Rick? We're looking into him. You're not looking hard enough. She didn't sound offended. Tell me why. I laid everything out: the master key, the mailbox room, Steve showing up minutes after Rick every Friday, and Rick telling everyone in the building I'd moved to Arizona. When I finished, the line was silent for several seconds. If you're right, she finally said, this is a lot bigger than identity theft. I know. We'll need proof they're working together. I can help. No, she replied immediately. I don't want you confronting either of them. I told her I wouldn't. That wasn't entirely true. 3 days later, after business hours, we gathered in the Franklin Towers conference room. Around the table sat Detective Mitchell, Postal Inspector David Lawson, 2 HOA board members, Linda Harris from the security company, and me. Postal Inspector Lawson caught me off guard. I thought this was an identity theft case, I said. He shook his head. It started that way. But someone has also been stealing your mail. That's a federal crime. He leaned forward. If Rick Wallace used his position to intercept residents' mail, losing his job will be the least of his problems. Linda Harris switched on the projector and pulled up more security footage. It wasn't just Daniel, she said. We found 6 other residents following the same pattern. Every victim was over 55. Every one of them left town for at least a month. Every single time, Rick visited first. Then Steve showed up shortly afterward. No one spoke. One of the HOA board members finally whispered, "How many victims are we talking about?" Linda opened another file. So far, 9. The conference room went silent. 9 victims. I hadn't been singled out. I wasn't special. I was simply next on the list. Somehow, that realization made me even angrier. Detective Mitchell broke the silence. I think they've turned this into a business. Lawson nodded. And businesses exist to make money. Then he looked at me. Mr. Mercer, would you be willing to help us catch them? The plan was almost too simple. Rick already knew I'd come home unexpectedly. Now we needed him to believe I'd left again. So I made sure everyone saw me leave. I loaded 2 suitcases into my truck. Harold watched from his balcony while Mrs. Lopez asked where I was headed. I answered loud enough for Rick, who just happened to be walking across the lobby, to hear every word. Back to Phoenix. Another consulting contract. I'll probably be gone 3 weeks. Rick smiled politely. Safe travels. I smiled back. Thanks. Neither of us meant it. Instead of driving to the airport, I checked into the same hotel 2 miles away, room 214. Detective Mitchell called it protective surveillance. I called it waiting. 2 days later, Linda phoned. It happened. What happened? Apartment 10B just went up for rent. Seconds later, screenshots appeared on my phone. Luxury downtown condo. Fully furnished. Immediate occupancy. $2,600 per month. Contact S. Collins Property Management. Steve hadn't even bothered inventing a fake company anymore. When Detective Mitchell saw the listing, she laughed. He's getting sloppy. I shook my head. No, he thinks nobody can touch him. The prospective renter wasn't a renter at all. He was Detective Jason Reed of the Columbus Police Department, a 53-year-old undercover veteran who fit the role perfectly. Steve met him at a neighborhood coffee shop while Rick unlocked the building exactly as expected. Reed handed over a cashier's check for the deposit. Steve handed him a lease already signed with my forged signature. Hidden cameras captured every second. Across the street, Postal Inspector Lawson watched from an unmarked SUV. Inside apartment 10B, Detective Mitchell waited with Officer Grant, Officer Lewis, and me. Being back inside my own condo felt surreal. Emily had driven down from Chicago the night before to help restore everything. One by one, she rehung every family photograph. When she placed her Ohio State graduation picture back on the hallway wall, she smiled. There. Now it finally feels like home again. I looked around the condo. She was right. It did. At exactly 2:17 that afternoon, footsteps echoed outside the front door. Then voices. Steve laughed. I think you're going to love this place, another voice answered. It already looks perfect. Keys jingled. The deadbolt unlocked. The front door swung open. Steve stepped inside and froze. Waiting for him were Detective Mitchell, Postal Inspector Lawson, Officer Grant, Officer Lewis, 3 HOA board members, Emily, and me. For nearly 5 long seconds, no one moved. Steve simply stared. The envelope holding Detective Reed's cashier's check slipped from Steve's hand and landed softly on my hardwood floor. Behind him, Rick stood frozen in the hallway, the color draining from his face. He took one slow step backward, then another. Officer Lewis moved into the doorway. I wouldn't. Rick glanced toward the elevator. Harold Benson was standing there with his arms crossed. Beside him were Mrs. Lopez and several other residents. No one blocked his path. They simply watched. For the first time in months, Rick had nowhere left to run. Detective Mitchell broke the silence. Stephen Collins, Richard Wallace, you're both under arrest. Steve turned toward Rick. Rick turned toward Steve. Almost in unison, they pointed at each other. It was his idea. No, it was his. Detective Mitchell gave the faintest smile. 22 years on the job, she said. That's usually how partnerships end. Officer Grant cuffed Steve while Officer Lewis secured Rick. Neither man resisted. They looked beaten long before the handcuffs locked into place. As detectives began collecting evidence, Harold quietly stepped inside my condo. He looked around the room, the furniture, the family photos, the peaceful silence. Then he looked at me with tired eyes. I haven't slept through the night in 2 months. I smiled. You will tonight. He nodded slowly. I think we all will. As Steve walked past me in handcuffs, he finally spoke, barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. I looked at the man I'd once considered my closest friend. You didn't just steal my condo. I held his gaze. You stole peace of mind from everyone in this building. He lowered his head without another word. And for the first time since I came home, the silence inside Franklin Towers finally felt like home again. That first quiet night almost felt unfamiliar. No screams echoing through the walls. No furniture dragging across the floor after midnight. No neighbors peeking through their doors to see what was happening in apartment 10B. Just the distant hum of the elevator and a television playing somewhere down the hall. I'd never appreciated ordinary silence until it disappeared. 3 months later, I walked into the Franklin County Courthouse, wearing the same navy blue suit I'd bought for Emily's college graduation. I hadn't worn it since. The courtroom wasn't full, but nearly every seat behind me was occupied. Harold was there. Mrs. Lopez was there. Several Franklin Towers residents had come. Even Michael Rhodes had taken the morning off work. None of them had been asked to attend. They came because Rick Wallace and Steve Collins had taken something from every one of us. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, this investigation identified 9 confirmed victims. A quiet murmur spread through the courtroom. 9. Even after everything, the number still shocked me. Detectives had uncovered the entire operation. For years, Rick quietly studied the residents of Franklin Towers. He knew who spent winters in Florida or Arizona, who visited grandchildren for weeks at a time, and who left town to recover from surgery with family. Whenever an apartment sat empty long enough, he called Steve. Steve found someone looking for a furnished short-term rental. Sometimes the renter was completely innocent, like Michael Rhodes. Sometimes they suspected something wasn't right but accepted the bargain anyway. Either way, Rick forged the paperwork, intercepted the owner's mail, redirected utility notices, and made each apartment appear completely legitimate. It had worked over and over again until they picked the wrong building and the wrong homeowner. Steve pleaded guilty, not because he suddenly found a conscience, but because the evidence left him no way out. Security footage, mail records, bank transfers, hidden camera recordings. Every piece fit together. Before sentencing, Judge Eleanor Watkins gave him one last chance to speak. Steve rose slowly. In just a few months, he looked years older. His shoulders sagged, and gray had spread through his hair. He turned toward me. I'd like to say something to Daniel. The judge nodded. Go ahead. Steve swallowed hard. I never meant for it to get this big. I said nothing. I owed people money, he continued. I thought I could fix everything. You were gone. I didn't think anyone would get hurt. To my surprise, I wasn't angry anymore. I was disappointed. I loaned you $40,000, I said quietly, and I never once asked you to pay it back. Steve lowered his eyes. I know. You could have asked me for help again. I was ashamed. I nodded. So, you decided stealing from strangers was easier. He had no answer. There wasn't one. Judge Watkins sentenced Steve to 4 years in state prison, taking his guilty plea and cooperation into account. Then she turned to Rick Wallace. Unlike Steve, Rick refused to accept responsibility. He blamed Steve. He blamed poor record-keeping. He blamed misunderstandings. He blamed everyone except himself. The judge wasn't convinced. Rick had abused a position of trust, stolen federal mail, forged legal documents, and helped orchestrate a long-running fraud scheme. His sentence was significantly longer. As deputies led him away, he glanced back one last time. No one looked back. Life eventually found its way back to normal. At first, every unexpected knock on my door made me tense. Over time, that feeling disappeared. Franklin Towers slowly became home again. The HOA replaced every mechanical lock with electronic access systems. Every master key entry now required digital authorization and left a permanent record. Residents planning extended trips could notify management, but emergency access now required approval from 2 HOA board members instead of a single manager. Harold liked to joke that Franklin Towers had become Fort Knox for retirees. None of us argued. Michael Rhodes and I became unlikely friends. It still makes me laugh. The first time we met, he was wearing my bathrobe and accusing me of breaking into his apartment. 6 months later, we were watching a Guardians game together at a sports bar near Easton Town Center. Before long, he bought a condo of his own, a legitimate one this time. Every few weeks, he'd text me pictures of some new project. A grill, fresh paint, Christmas decorations. His messages almost always ended the same way. Still my condo. I'd reply, good. Keep it that way. Emily started visiting more often, not because she thought I needed someone watching over me, but because we both realized how easy it is to assume there will always be another visit, another phone call, another holiday. One Sunday, after helping me plant flowers on the balcony, she held out her hand and smiled. You know, I should probably have a key again. I smiled back. I was hoping you'd ask. This time, handing someone a spare key didn't feel like taking a risk. It felt like giving my trust to the right person. There's a world of difference. People sometimes ask if I hate Steve. The honest answer surprises them. I don't. Hatred is heavy, and I've carried enough weight already. What I feel is sadness. Not because he went to prison, but because he traded decades of friendship for a scam that was always destined to collapse. He didn't just lose his freedom, he lost everyone who had ever believed in him. No judge could have handed down a harsher sentence than that. As for me, getting my condo back wasn't the greatest victory. The greatest victory was walking through my own front door again without wondering if I still belonged there. When we're young, we spend our lives building something. As we get older, we learn that protecting what we've built matters just as much. If this story reminds you to trust your instincts, value the people who've earned your trust, and never stop standing up for what's right, then I'm grateful you stayed with me. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join me again for another story.